Hello and welcome. My name is Nara Wilson and I am the SAFC's Executive for the First Nations Industry Development. I want to start by saying here at the South Australian Film Corporation, we acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains and pay our respect to elders past and present. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage beliefs and relationship with the land. We acknowledge that they are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living still today. And we also extend that respect to other Aboriginal language groups and other First Nations peoples that are joining us today as well here with us around the country. Just some quick housekeeping. I just want to remind the audience that the session is being recorded today and will sit and stay as a resource on our website afterwards if you wish to share or re-watch later. And for the majority of this presentation, you will be staring at a presentation, but you'll get to see our smiling faces at the end. So thank you very much for joining us here today to mark International Day of People with a Disability for 2021, and I wish to warmly welcome Gail Mellis. Gail Mellis is an award-winning South Australian designer, artist, and cultural leader in accessible arts, practice, and disability-led arts with more than 30 years' experience. Gail proudly defines herself as a disabled artist and is committed to cultural accessibility, equality, and diversity within an arts context. Seen as a cultural leader within both the disability arts and mainstream arts sectors, she has a passion for provoking conversation and change around disability. Gail has always been interested in effecting change and pushing aesthetic boundaries to tell new stories. Gail is a creative person, a change agent, a dreamer, doer, and a thinker that sees possibility everywhere. Among her many prestigious accolades are the 2020 Australia Council National Arts and Disability Award for an Established Artist and the Jeff Crowhurst Memorial Award for Individual Contribution to Community Arts and Cultural Development at the 2020 South Australian Ruby Awards. Gail is the SAFC's Disability Strategy Executive, and uniquely for a screen agency in Australia, Gail's works crosses all aspects of SAFC's programs and operations. She is also the artistic director of Tutti Arts, which is South Australia's only multi-arts organisation where artists with disability creative visual art, theatre, music, dance, film, digital media, and installations for a growing local and international audience. For more than 30 years, Gail has made an outstanding and sustained contribution to the vibrancy of Australian arts. Gail's work traverses theatre, dance, circus, opera, disability arts, visual arts, installation, digital engagement, screen, and more. And we feel very privileged that she offers us training and education year round on what best practice is working with and for the deaf and disabled screen sector on how to be a more inclusive organisation that creates safe and respectful workplaces and opportunities for stories to be told by this community who so often do not have the platform to do so. Gail, as mentioned, we do your disability equality training here at the SAFC. Can you tell us what disability equality training is and why it is an important methodology?
Thanks, Nara. I suppose I just want to say I expect a lot of people may have done disability awareness training. I've heard of that. Well, disability equality training is very, very different. For a start, it's actually been developed by disabled people, and only disabled people can deliver it. And I suppose the fundamental difference between the two types of training is that the awareness training focuses on the functional aspects of disabled people, like what we can't do, and has a lot of time, spend lots of time on etiquette. And the disability equality training deals with disability as a social discrimination issue and inequality. So, but one thing of note is that during my, when I deliver disability equality training, I'm not a trainer. That's not my role. Rather, it's a guided process, and my role is to facilitate and ensure that everyone is involved in discussion about the issues. That's all I was going to say, Nara. Nara, I think you're on mute.
Apologies. I'm back, Gail.
Thanks, Nara.
Thank you for that. I'll hand over to you to begin now. Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to say thanks to Nara and a welcome to everybody. I just want to reassure everybody that today isn't like a formal training session. I'm not going to be doing disability college training. This session is really a taster. It's an introduction to the social model of disability, and I would encourage everyone here today to think of it as the beginning of a conversation. Moving forward, and we might tell you a bit more at the end, we are going to be running more webinars like this in the future. I'd also like to encourage everyone to use the chat function, both to to respond to any old ideas or questions posed. And unlike the training I normally deliver, I'll be doing lots of talking today. So, no, I can't see the slide. Is there a slide up there? Sorry, just a couple of technical issues that I want to get sorted. Yeah, if you could take us to the next slide, Nara. Not sure what happened there. These things. So I'm going to start today by posing some questions to everybody. The first question is, do you think we are all equal? Is the goal to make all disabled people normal? And importantly, do you have a deaf or disabled friend? Not a work colleague, a family member, a friend of a friend's, but your friend. If you don't have a disabled friend, I'd encourage you throughout this session to keep thinking about why you don't have disabled friends. This image actually shows two disabled actors, Kaylia Pole and Sam Bateman, in a scene from the film The Loop. Both actors work with the company at Autistic Theatre Ensemble. And if you want to share things in the chat, please do. I'm going to ask another question of you. What does disability mean to you? You can write down words and phrases that pop into your head when you think about the word disability, and please, I encourage you to use the chat function to do that. Or feel free to finish the sentence, disability is. If you're a bit unsure about using the chat function today, just keep asking yourself that question as well. And I must say, these first two questions that I've posed to you are something I would normally do in training. Oh, great. It's great to see people are actually into the chat room. That is fantastic. And now, another question. And this is another thing that I ask when I'm actually delivering training. And that is, what is disability? And where is disability? And I would invite people again to use the chat room to locate the only spot of disability in this image. There is one location. So please feel free to respond, or you might want to just take some notes. And I know we've got some people here from some organisations, and maybe you can compare them later with each other. So disability. I'm going to give you some statistics. The UN say about 15% of people globally are disabled. The figure in Australia is 1 in 5 people, or 20% of the population. That's over 4.4 million Australian people. In South Australia, it's 23% of the population. 88% is hidden. There are 1.2 billion people in the world who are disabled. So that is also the biggest minority in the world. So I know you're probably thinking, yeah, statistics. and maybe you deal with statistics all the time, but you might be thinking, well, that disability is something that happens to someone else or doesn't have anything to do with you. The fact is, the average Australian will spend 7 to 8 years of their life with an impairment. So it does affect us all. Stories affect how we live our lives, how we see other people, how we think about ourselves, and how people see us. To be a disabled person is to exist within a society where your image and identity are created by beliefs, values, misassumptions, and stereotypes. As disabled people, we've grown up with I suppose you could call a symbolic obliteration on screen, where we haven't seen people like ourselves authentically represented or represented at all. Then we've been played by non-disabled actors as metaphors to drive the storyline. And also those actors looking to, get an Oscars. There have been 59, or over that now I think, 59 actors that have won Oscars for playing disabled characters. And if you play a disabled character in screen, which is called cripping up, your chances of actually taking home an Oscar increase by over 50%. So, but now it's time that disabled people are producers of their own image and storytellers of our own lives. Sorry, Nara, can you just go back? So if we consider that 20% of the population have some form of disability in Australia, then arguably they represent a huge talent pool and potential audience that is simply too large to ignore. And I just want to credit this image on the screen as well. It's from Limited Surrender, made by disabled South Australian artist and filmmaker Kirsty Martinson. In fact, that's Kirsty herself, always doing amazing things. Currently, there is no framework or consistency across the sector in regards to disability. Disability is not static. Disability can be congenital or acquired. Access and inclusiveness must also include temporary and situational impairment. And you see these images on your screen as we speak that represent some of those situations. It is therefore vital to embed access across all areas of the screen industry. For screen agencies, who are often the first point of call for screen practitioners asking for advice around disability, it is crucial that screen agency staff have a solid framework and understanding of disability. For example, how do you assess a script about disability if you're non-disabled? Until everybody understands this, I worry that we'll continue to see the same old disability tropes on our screens. This actually leads us into models of disability. So models of disability are really just frameworks developed in order to understand the way society works and interacts with disability. It's important to note that models of disability have changed over time and they continue to evolve. And we're going to learn about the social model today, and there are other models beyond that, but until we actually get that, we can't move on. So let's start with a little recap of some of the models that you might be familiar with. The first is the charity model, which still exists today. Basically, the charity model houses disabled people in institutions, usually based on the category of a medical condition. And people kept out of view from society. And I think what it's done is it created a lot of fear around disabled people. The other place fear starts is with children who are so open. It's very common, it's happened to me, where you see a child that are really interested. I use a wheelchair, They're really interested, so I talk to them, and if I get the opportunity, and ask them, do they have a scooter, and maybe we could go on a race one day, and I tell them how cool it is to have a wheelchair. But often what happens, a child starts to approach me, look at me, and a parent will grab their hand and pull them away. That's another place people fear. So for non-disabled people here today, I'm sure that you've probably grown up with fear of disability too, because it's been very unknown. Under the charity model, families were made to feel shame and around disability, and it was like a personal tragedy of having to look after the eternal child. Again, we see this trope a lot in films, still to today. So the charity model is really based on pity and fears and not rights. And its main operation is to tug on everyone's heartstrings, to people to open their purses and give money to help little Mary Lou get a new wheelchair. The other thing it's known as in the disability community is inspirational porn. And that was a phrase coined by the late Australian disability advocate Stella Young. And it really describes the really positive images that we see, in stories, videos, memes, that sort of rely on the underlying assumption that disability is by default tragic. And if disability wasn't so terrible, then depictions of brave, cheerful and accomplished disabled people wouldn't be as particularly uplifting. And the other thing that gets on my goat too is that you often see have a prop in an image. And when I talk about prop, probably not talking about props we normally think of, the prop is usually a non-disabled person leaning over the disabled person, often a child or a young person, smiling at them like they're helping. Yeah, so if you didn't know before, you now know that's called inspirational porn. Next, we're going to talk about the medical model of disability. So the medical model has several underlying assumptions, and it's mostly pretty negative. So what it tells us is that disability is a deficit, and it makes us abnormal, that you need to be cured, can't make decisions about our own lives. We can never be equal with non-disabled people, and that the disabled person needs to change and adapt to fit into society. And it's all about what you can't do, but really that we need fixing. The medical model is very prevalent and a model that I would recommend that you start to understand more, in contrast to the social model and other models moving forward. You might have noticed though, in this image, there's a wheelchair there with the Superman logo on it, and that does, for me, relate to Christopher Reeves. And I think for me personally, as a disabled person, it made me really sad that he, after his accident, when he became a paraplegic and a wheelchair user, he spent the rest of his life trying to find a cure rather than living his life. But that's what the medical model does. And then, so this is just some thinking about disability that fits into the social model, and it's probably it's one of the most useful and progressive ways to help understand disability is to make a clear distinction between impairment and disability. So when you make that distinction, these are how they define. So impairment is a medical condition, illness or injury, which will or is likely to impact on the way our body or mind works. So if you can think about impairment like biological, disability, however, is defined as the limitation and exclusion of someone with an impairment to access opportunities and take place in society on an equal basis as the result of barriers. We are disabled by what society does and how society is constructed. Therefore, disability is like racism or sexism. I want to talk a little bit more about impairment and disability because there's a world of difference. So as disabled people, we use the term impairment to talk about any of our medical conditions or diagnoses or description of our functioning. But really the word disability describes the social effects of impairment. And disability is not a description or a personal characteristic. So a disabled person is not a person with a disability, as the person doesn't own the disability, and in that way, in the same way that a person, might be a person with brown hair. So consequently, the opposite of disabled is not able-bodied or abled, it's non-disabled. And it's really important and critical that you start to understand, sorry Nara, you understand the critical difference between these two terms, because it allows us to talk about things separately and clearly about a person, a named individual, is a person, an impairment is their functioning, disability is social barriers. So one of the I'm going to show you who this slide is first. In the centre of the slide is Paul Vagnarali, and he's the subject and co-director of the short film Definition. Paul is also a professional DPO. Anyway, what we're talking about, that's going to lead us on to the social model of disability. The social model is a framework that aids us to understand about problems of disability and helps us to understand the best solutions to disability. This was developed by disabled people in order to challenge the view that we're in a constant state of illness and that it is our impairments, our bodies, our minds and senses which are a problem, which relates to the medical or individual model of disability. The origins of this approach can be traced back to the 1960s and 70s, but the specific term social model of disability emerged from the United Kingdom in the 80s. In 1983, the disabled academic Mike Oliver coined the phrase social model of disability. And for context about Mike Oliver, Mike was a British sociologist, author and a disability rights activist, and he was the first professor of disability studies in the world. But very sadly, we lost Mike Oliver in 2019. I'm just going to read a quick quote from the UK organisation, the Union of Physically Impaired Against Segregation, and this was from 1975. And they said, "It is our view, it is society which disables physically impaired people. Disability is something posed on top of our impairments by the way we are unnecessarily isolated and excluded from full participation in society." So you can see that the social models had roots for a very, very long time. Okay. I think someone said this question, but next I'm just going to show you a short film made by disabled people in the UK about the social model, so I'll just summarise it. I've spent a lot of time in the UK and learnt from lots of disabled artists, disability arts organisations and non-disabled allies, and there is a lot that we can learn from the UK. So we're just going to watch this now.
According to the medical model of disability, the word disabled means less able. Less able to achieve your potential, less able to have meaningful relationships, less able to play an active part in the world around you, and that this is just your bad luck. This outdated view of the world puts the responsibility of overcoming disabling barriers on the person with an impairment. But this idea is changing. The more modern social model of disability says that a person doesn't have a disability, but that they are disabled. They are disabled by society. It is the attitudes and physical barriers imposed on them by society that prevents them from achieving their potential. The social model was developed by disabled people and their allies to help them take action against discrimination and to empower people to find solutions, remove barriers, and campaign together for equality and human rights. They showed how people with lots of different impairments face many of the same problems. These disabling barriers include prejudiced opinions and attitudes, restricted access, and people being systematically excluded. The social model looks for the ways that society can be planned and organised in order to provide accessibility, independence, and opportunity in a way that enables people rather than disables them. What we learn from the social model of disability is that disability is a social construct created by social barriers, barriers which can be eliminated. We learn that it is the responsibility of government, public spaces, businesses, and individual people to make the changes to increase the access and build a more equal society where everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential.
Apologies there, I didn't realise I was muted. So what I was just saying is that I really hope you enjoyed that short film. I think it really sums up the social model beautifully. And again to say, as we talk through about the social model and other things relevant to it, that there are models beyond the social model as well. But if we can get this one, you get it once, you get it, it empowers you so much because you can see things before they happen. But I'm just going to give some other definitions then in the social model. So the word disability actually means discrimination and barriers. When we talk about citizens, we're talking about people. And by good access, we will achieve equality. All the social model really does is redefine disability as a social issue, and that barriers are not an inevitable outcome of impairment, but are socially created. In summary, what the social model tells us is the problem is not the individual. It involves everyone in identifying solutions, and it acknowledges people's rights to full participation as citizens. I wasn't going to go into a lot about language today, that, and we respect that people choose their own language. But under the social model, the way I'm talking about it and what it means to me is that we don't use terms such as people with disabilities or people with disability, because it blurs the distinction between the biological, the impairment, and the social, disabled. And so often this language is called identity language as well, and the terms are used are disabled and non-disabled. I also want to touch on the deaf community, that deaf with a capital D actually relates and recognises people that use sign language as their first language. Some deaf people don't relate to the word disabled or disability, some do, but basically the deaf community are a cultural and linguistic minority. The other thing I just want to briefly touch on is rights. The right to life is the most basic human right. However, throughout history, there have been times when people with disability have had their lives threatened because they were considered less worthwhile than normal people. Although the movement has been largely discredited, eugenist ideas and practices continue today in various forms, including forced sterilisation and selective abortion. Negative eugenics is the term given to the practice of discouraging or preventing people considered to be unfit from breeding. With the development of medical science and neo-eugenic beliefs, they're actually finding more supporters. You've got prenatal screening that provide prospective parents with the power to decide who should and who should not inhabit the world. That is the medical model of disability. But increasingly, vocal and well-organised disability movements are behind the crucial paradigm change from viewing disability as a personal tragedy towards viewing disability as a human rights issue. Disabled people are due their human rights and their civil rights just like every other person in the world. But sometimes we need equity in the form of access and support in order to fully participate equally in society. And if you didn't already know, Australia is a signatory to the UN Convention, International Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, the UNCRPD. Again, just a little bit more about the difference between the medical model and the social model. The medical model will ask you, what's wrong with you? And I have to fess up, I don't want anyone to hear that I've done it to. When people say that to me, I just go, look at myself and see what's happened, because I've done nothing. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm me. I'm really proud of being me, and I wouldn't change it in a heartbeat. So that's a very confronting question. And usually a lot of disabled try to subvert that in some way. But what the social model asks is, what is wrong with society? So what really needs to happen is the social, economic, political and environmental conditions need to be changed to facilitate the full enjoyment of all rights by disabled people. So again, another example of a medical model question might be, are your difficulties in understanding due to your hearing problem? But the social model would ask, are your difficulties in understanding people the result of their inability to communicate with you? The medical model might ask, did your health problem or / disability prevent you from going out as often as you would like? But the social model would ask, are there any transport or financial problems preventing you from going out as often or as far as you'd like? So really, our task is to really understand the medical and social model, because it's really important that we can change the medical model problems into social model solutions. This is one of my favourite images because it really relates to me. Under the medical model, I'm that person with the weak hands that can't open the jar. Under the social model, that packaging needs redesigning so I can open the jar. And I think this image for me captures the social and medical model so simply. I hope it does for other people here today as well. But it's only by understanding the social model, which covers rights and self-determination, that real systemic change can be made, and we need to see that systemic change in the screen industry. Just going to talk a little bit about barriers. So there's three main headings to think about when you think about barriers. There's organisational, for example, the legal system, education, class structure, or the industrial nation of the screen industry is a barrier. There's environmental, and that relies that disabled people experience, and that can be things like the environment, buildings, information, communication. Do you know we're still doing new builds with steps up to the main entrance, and particularly in the cultural sector? I don't get it. I thought when the MAC did all their upgrades a number of years ago, and they had all those steps out the front, I thought maybe it was an installation. I did tweet them continually when I was visiting, and I got no response. You know, everyone needs to get in through the front door. The other one is attitudinal, and that is like negative attitudes and assumptions and low expectations. Now, when people are selected on track record in the industry, screen industry, they may never get a chance. So I'm just going to talk you through just some of the barriers which deaf and disabled people may face in the screen sector. So it could be practical issues such as being unable to drive or physically use equipment. It could be the lack of flexible working options like working part-time. It could be that they require access support from other people such as an Auslan interpreter or a support worker. It can be attitudes of potentially colleagues and others in the industry. Sometimes it can be an employer's lack of understanding of their legal obligations toward disabled people. Sometimes the routes into the industry, you know, for example, you know, starting as a runner is a physically demanding role for some people. Some disabled people can be a runner, but some of us can't. So it's thinking about other routes in as well. A really important thing is intersectionality, and I want to talk about this more, but you know, for example, that means that, say, a person of colour, they may say disableism and racism and so forth. So it is much more complex for people whose identities are intersectional. A lot of disabled people have a non-linear nature to their career. Another example could be not having to go on location, or alternatively, there could be sometimes fear to send, say, a physically impaired person onto a location. We are all individuals, and you need to ask our access requirements. Access needs or requirements and adjustments is another thing. Not being asked about your access. Too scared to ask for access. And you'll find potentially find, as I did when I was in my early career, I spent a lot of time going, no, I'm fine. You don't have to do anything different from me. I'm fine. That was so not true. But you know, the cultural industries are bigger, more broadly. That's what happened. At the SAFC, we've actually introduced 2 forms here for all staff, all applicants, and either into some productions. And that's an access requirements form and also a wellness at work form, so that the SAFC can gather that information so people don't have to ask. So I just need a little drink. Now, if you're an employer and you're thinking about that it might be really expensive to employ a disabled person, that is not necessarily the case. Next year we're going to present a session about Job Access, which is a federal government scheme, and other funded support available to help you employ disabled people. Sorry, I've lost my way. I was talking about the cost. But anyway, there are different ways of doing things. And if there's one thing this pandemic has shown us, and shown non-disabled people, is that we can work in different ways and still do incredible things. Excuse me. I'm just popping off screen. I don't know where this cough's come from. And we'll move on. Oh, sorry. You have. I'm sorry, everybody. Apologies. I don't know where this little dry cough's come from. I have been a bit ill recently with some little bug, so maybe that's where it's from. So, there's a fantastic quote on the screen. This actually relates to the Australian media sector. And I just want to say that it's not a disabled person's job to change the system that locks us out or to be an expert on disability. Some people welcome the role, but not all disabled people want to do or have the skills to be able to take on those sorts of things and be a teacher. From personal experience, I can't stress to you how hard it is to be both the interrupter and the teacher. It continually takes you away from your own practice, but I often see sometimes it's amazing practitioners that have the experience and the knowledge, and so they do this, but it is exhausting. We really want you to be allies and learn this stuff as well. It makes me very, very tired. But anyway, disability is complex. There can be shame. You know, we're all born into normal families. There's stigma and there can be trauma. And I often talk about a lot of disabled people have a coming out story because of that shame and stigma involved. People have been excluded and disadvantaged and oppressed for a long time. And of course there is a lack of representation. There are other disabled people who will try to pass or self-exclude, and you cannot give someone their identity or put that identity onto them. I have been in a work situation where I saw that happen. Someone had a medical condition but they did not identify as disabled, yet they were put in a role to support a disability arts organisation. That was really difficult and tricky for everyone involved. And I'm sure that person didn't want that role at all. But something I've observed across the screen sector is the ad hoc use of disability consultants and panel members or storytellers. And I'm here to say you can't just drag the first disabled person in off the street or wherever you may find them. It is important that consultants and people like panellists need to be deaf and disabled people who understand disability in the broadest sense. They need to understand identity politics, rights, the social model of disability. They need to understand access, self-determination, authentic representation, disability justice, ableism, and have some understanding of the screen industry and more. So because many people only have their own narrow view of their own personal experience of disability, and which is very valid. However, for example, you know, someone with an ABI may not have any understanding of what it's like to have a physical impairment or a sensory impairment. And by doing that, it doesn't help to make the culture and systemic change that needs to be made. So please try and find people that are very experienced and know their shit. And I'm sure some of you do know those sorts of people. And please try and support them, particularly if they're a screen practitioner. And try not to get into arguments with disabled people about this, because a lot of us don't agree. But anyway, back to the social model. It's everyone's responsibility to make change, not just disabled people. And the sector will see cultural transformation when it's underpinned by the social model. For many disabled people, we need to do it differently, and that should be okay and should be able to be accommodated. Most importantly, particularly to the non-disabled people attending today, we need you as allies. You can choose to be an ally, because we need you so much. But please, it's really understand what an ally, important to understand what an ally is, when to step back, when to step in. But to be a good ally, you have to understand disability. And I'm going to get a check of the time in a minute, because I told you I was chatting. So I might have to fast forward some stuff. So just about equality and diversity. If we think about equality, Equality is based on your human right to participation in your own society, and equality is ensuring individuals and groups of individuals are treated fairly and equally and no less favourably than other individuals or groups. But equality does not always mean treating people the same. Equality is about having access to the necessary resources and supports so that individuals can have equal opportunities and make the most of their lives and talents. Diversity, well, that means difference, and everybody is, individual and different. When it comes to disabled people, we're never just disabled people. We are diverse. We cross all demographics and participate in the world in many different ways. However, the conversation around diversity often leaves out disability. But the issue of disability cannot be looked at alone. And for many people, and for disabled people, we are intersectional. And to that meaning that our disability intersects with other attributes, such as gender, race, class, parenthood, which may all impact on someone's career. So therefore, the exclusion of disabled voices in conversations about diversity can never, ever exist separately from those conversations around race, sexual orientation, gender. And it's also really vitally important that we recognise the intersectionality of disabled people who belong to additional marginalised group. These people include First Nations, culturally and linguistic diverse, LGBTQIA plus people, economically disadvantaged people. Again, disability is complex, but that's okay. We can get through it together. We work together. But if we can all agree that it's increasingly necessary to portray the world in all of its authenticity and diversity, well, disability is diversity. And I want you to remember and take this with you, that disabled people shed light on a different aspect of the human experience, and we contribute to the richness and diversity of society. There are many emerging deaf and disabled people who are key creatives, but there are also experienced, award-winning and brilliant talented writers and directors in screen and other creative industries. Not everyone is emerging, and I'm hoping as the industry moves forward and embrace diversity, and which includes disability, that many people will share their coming out story with you. So deaf and disabled people can be directors, producers, screenwriters, casting directors, line producers, production coordinators, location managers, production accountants, and on and on and on and on and on. And they're also audiences. Disabled people are actors and extras. Disabled people must play disabled characters. Deaf people must play deaf characters. There can be no more cripping up. And I'm happy to have a long conversation about that, and we will be looking at authentic representation as a topic next year. And I'm really happy to have a talk about cancel culture and all those things that are very topical at the moment. The other thing is that deaf and disabled people should play roles that aren't deaf or disabled characters. And as I said, deaf and disabled people are already working in the South Australian screen industry and across the screen industry globally. Many impairments are hidden and many people don't identify. But as people start feeling proud of their identity, that's exciting, and that's going to be exciting for the whole sector. I'm just going to ask again, what does disability mean? And so after all this learning, I hope, sharing I've done with you today, I'd be really interested to know, has your perspective changed in any way? And please, again, use the chat room to make comments on that. As I said, we're going to come back next year with a series of webinars, but you've got some homework. Got some sets of homework, because I'm going to recommend some screenworks that I think are important to watch. And the first one is Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution, and is available on Netflix. It's a Netflix original documentary. I just want to tell you a little bit, because one of the most amazing films I've seen personally, but I do have a lot invested in this story as well. But James Lebrecht is a disabled man who co-directed Crip Camp. James comes from the screen industry, you know, he's a professional sound editor. And this film actually traces the disability rights movement through the US. It's riveting and amazing. So Crip Camp won an audience award at Sundance and was nominated for an Oscar for Best Documentary, which was so exciting. But this year at the Emmys, there was still not a ramp for James Lebrecht, a wheelchair user, despite promises from the Emmys last year. So this shows that people can pay lip service to disabled people, even when they're Oscar nominated. The other thing that's happening this week is that SBS International are showing they're calling it the International Day of People with Disability collection, and that's all available now on SBS On Demand. My big top watch that you should watch is Code of the Freaks, because this really presents a radical reframing of the use of disabled characters in film. Matt Fraser, who you see on the screen there, amazing, brilliant performer and more. And some of you may recognise him recently. He had a role in Silent Witness recently, but he's done amazing things, including performing in Coney Island, in Preachers in Coney Island. So that's my big recommendation from SBS International. Next up, the ABC are doing Stories of Disability. My two top picks for you to watch are The Upside and Proud by Practice. Proud by Practice is only like a little 6-minute doco, but I think it says something about identity that we've started talking about today. So they're my top picks, and we will send you out the links to those and the names of those after this. Do I have much time left? Oh, can I get through? I can get through this in 5 minutes. Thank you everyone for bearing with me. So what I know to be true. I know that presence is an inclusion. If we don't have our access requirements met, then we're not included. Our human rights are the basic rights and freedoms that belong to every person in the world, from birth until death. And these basic rights are based on the values of dignity, fairness, equality, respect and independence. Disability is a normal part of life, and therefore deaf and disabled people should be accorded their human rights. And what we need to see deaf and disabled people front and centre in the screen industry. We need to see screen content being made using an alternative dramaturgy informed from a deaf and disability perspective. We need to enable deaf and disabled people to tell their own stories. The screen agencies and the wider screen sector can and need to address access. The fictions around surrounding disability need to be dispelled. I know that access and inclusion will lead to awesome. Advocacy is still vital, and so too is allyship. All screen content needs audio description and closed captioning for audience with sensory impairments. I also know that only by letting deaf and disabled people write, direct, consult, act in and produce stories that centre us can our stories be told. And that disability-led practice is crucial. Some other things we need to, and sorry, I've got to take another little drink. Or a big gulp. These are some of the things that we really need to consider and we can get into the future. We need to consider disableism and ableism. If these terms are new to you, they both describe disability discrimination, but the emphasis are slightly different. So disableism emphasises discrimination just against disabled people, and ableism emphasises discrimination in favour of non-disabled people. The other thing that we've got to talk about is non-disabled privilege, and usually that's white privilege. But, yeah. And I just want to share that every day I wake up, I have got to actually question my own privilege. Whilst I might be a disabled woman, well, there you go, I'm a woman and I'm disabled. Being white gives me a lot of privilege. And I always have to question that. I'm sorry, another drink. And unfortunately, many non-disabled people move through the world with an immense amount of privilege, and are often not conscious of of how the world is built, because it's built to cater for them and their comfort. But what the world currently does is create discomforts and barriers for disabled people. The other thing I know, there's much to do, but by working together, disabled people and our allies, we can make the change we need to make in the screen sector. We have a mantra, and that is nothing about us without us. Anything less will continue to fall short and be rejected. There's no time for more excuses. Again, I ask you to think of today's beginning of conversation. If you have any questions and suggestions for topics you would like us to cover next, please send them via email to feedback@safilm.com.au. I will look through the chat questions as well, so I'm aware of those. Sorry I couldn't interact enough through chat today. Got some ideas about more interaction that I just wasn't able to make happen by today. Also, I want to tell you this fabulous photo is again from the Loop, and it shows South Australian director Lorcan Hopper working with actor Sam Bateman. If you haven't seen the Loop, you must. Brilliant, if I must say so. So again, I just want to say thank you, and Nara, one more slide. Can you take me to the final slide? Yeah. Basically, I know it's not enough. We need to act, and if not now, then when? And I invite you all to join what will be, and can be, the most thrilling, exciting thing that's happened to the screen industry for a long time, when we get it right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And now, yeah.